wish that sometimes you could freeze frame a single moment in your day, look at it and say, this is not my life?
So I've got this Suntac motherboard. It's not an original IBM 5170 by a long shot, but it is an AT clone, and it's a clone of that exact IBM 5170 architecture, be it that this is actually capable of 12 MHz, whereas its original form is only capable of a maximum of 8 MHz. So 12 is quite a big leap. On first inspection, this board looks to be in relatively good condition. My main reason for buying this one is it was mostly complete. It actually had the processor, the RAM, and all the chips intact. Many of the 286 boards you find on eBay have been stripped for parts. Now that's okay if it's just the processor and RAM, those are replaceable. But in a lot of cases, people have stripped out GALs. Unless those have been uploaded to something like Internet Archive, then that board's pretty much just scrap or spare parts. Now looking at this board more closely, it looks like I might have worked on it before. Some of these chips have been inserted by a gorilla who was clearly quite angry at the time. Well, somebody has really gone to town on this chip. It'll take a little while to get this chip straight again, and then we'll put it in the tester and see if it's still good. The rest of the board looks like it's potentially been submerged in water for quite a while, or at least been damp. The rest of it's just general dust, grime, dirt, a little bit of corrosion here and there. It's had a battery on it at some point, but that's been removed. It doesn't look like the battery per se has caused much damage, but the board is incredibly dirty and a little bit corroded. So while I'm here, I may as well take an image of the two BIOS ROMs. There may be a version that's already readily available, but just in case, I'm going to take a copy, and I'll upload those to the Internet Archive. So as the board at this point is showing some signs of activity, I'm going to hook up a display card and connect the speaker to see if there's any other signs of life. Well, the output from the VGA is largely disappointing, but we are getting 3 beeps. Those 3 beeps are suggesting that the first 64K of RAM has not been detected. 64K is the minimum amount of RAM the BIOS requires to complete its power on self-test, or POST. So seeing that this indicates there's a problem with RAM, and these are all 1-bit wide RAM chips, I'm going to need to test all of the RAM to see if any of it is causing a problem. That's going to be painstaking, but something I have to do. Having done that, all the RAM checks out. So I started probing around the board and found that we're not getting a CAS signal. The CAS signal is the column address strobe, and that's there as part of the DRAM refresh. So, using the trusty microscope of quite cheapness, we can see that there are some signs that this board has been worked on before. Now this may be a previous person's attempt to get this board up and running, or it could be something that's quite historic, i.e. some damage that happened to the board, maybe when the battery was removed or at some earlier stage in its life. It doesn't look factory. But as we start to search around, there are actually issues. There are corroded traces on the board, and it looks like I found at least one break. To repair this, I'm going to find where it goes to and find either a via or a pin that makes sense to connect one end of a bodge wire to. Now I've found the via. I'm going to connect the wire to it by creating a kind of more of a substantial structure than just a straight piece of wire. This gives it a bit more to grab onto. Sponsors of this video are PCBWay. They provide PCB prototype fabrication from as little as $5. They also have a huge library of shared projects, and if you're not confident with a soldering iron, you can get them to assemble them for you. PCBWay also have CNC machining and 3D printing services. All of this is available at PCBWay.com. Thanks PCBWay for sponsoring this video. And tracing that back to the other side, we can see it goes to the pin on this IC. So by creating a loop, I can wrap it around the pin and it becomes part of the structure. So now we can test to see if we've got a CAS signal again. And yes, we have. It's actually working. We're actually seeing a signal being generated at startup. And we've got post numbers coming out on the card. It's going beyond where it got before. So let's get a monitor connected and see if we're getting any further in the post sequence. So in that first startup, we saw it count 512K of RAM. That's correct. As you'll notice, this board at that point only had 512K, half the RAM's actually missing. So let's get that RAM on, let's adjust the jumpers so that we've got them correct as according to the manual, and see if it can see the full 1 meg of RAM. So the reason the memory count on this is so slow is that it's only running at 6 MHz. That's because it's not in what it calls turbo mode, which is where it runs at the full 12. I'll come on to testing turbo mode once I've made sure that it's working at least at the 6 MHz. So I've taken the liberty of adding, off camera, a standard I/O card which gives me the ID interface and a floppy drive interface, which is connected to a compact flash card, and GoTech, which I've configured with a few floppy disk images to allow me to install DOS. You'll also note during these tests that there are some cable ties around one of the sockets. This is my attempt to keep that stability there for the time being, but we are definitely going to have to replace that socket at least to get this anywhere close to stable. I've also installed Crystal Caves. That seems to run okay at the 6 MHz, no problem. And I've also installed Wolfenstein 3D, which again runs okay at the 6 MHz. So, like I said, we're going to take this socket out and replace it. Looking at these sockets side by side, I know which one I'm going to choose. Not entirely sure why I decided to connect the budge wire first, because that just makes the rest of the soldering really awkward. But that's the path I decided to take. So, awkward angle with the monitor, but this is just to make sure it still posts. Still in the 6 MHz mode, but with the replaced socket. And we have success. It's actually booting, and I've not had to intervene by squeezing the socket or doing anything strange. So now, with this little blue jumper installed, you'll see it just around the center of the board there, this now is in turbo mode. So we're going to see if it will boot and function and be somewhat stable in turbo, which is the 12 MHz. And just in case changing one thing at a time isn't enough, we're going to put in a Masco processor at the same time, just to make it really difficult for me to diagnose any problems that might ensue. Well, the memory test is definitely faster in turbo mode, so that's a reasonable sign that it is now running at a faster speed. And to check that, we're going to use Checkit and just do a quick CPU speed test. It has detected that it has a Masco processor, and we're definitely running at 12 MHz. So that is good. However, the stability of this machine is yet to be seen. But obviously the best thing to do now is to put it in a case. Well, it appears to be working when back in the case. However, what I was finding is that when it started to get warm, or you tried to do anything for any extended period, it would hang, become unstable. The keyboard would stop working sporadically and start showing random characters. So I was going to have to take the whole thing back out of the box. I'm going to speed that up for you, but it took me quite a while. It's turned out to be a mixture of corrosion, heat creep, and still damaged and dodgy sockets. Yep, now we're going to replace the socket on the chip, which is the main part of the memory control circuit, and address decoding, because that is definitely doing something odd.
Three days later.
Now, I'm going to show you what happens if I leave it overnight. This is the exact scenario I get every single time. And we're going to do this with a little more sound on so you can actually hear everything that's happening. So basically, still got a problem with one of these sockets. So I'm going to have to take the board out again, and I'm going to replace all of them. We've already done this socket, we've done the socket just under here. The CPU, I'm fairly confident is actually okay. We could maybe leave that one. The larger PLCC here, and these two. I think it's this one that's the culprit now. We don't have a problem with it not detecting RAM. That was all solved by replacing the socket that was controlling the RAS and CAS lines. Replacing this socket has definitely improved stability when in turbo mode. It now works relatively consistently. The keyboard errors that I was occasionally getting were sorted out by cleaning the pins on the jumper. It was basically in the wrong mode for the BIOS it had. We're getting there, but we're still not on a home run just yet. So with this final socket replaced, the question that hangs in the balance is this now stable? Is it back in the box? Is it functioning? Am I using it as a computer? Well, the answer to that question is
We hope you enjoyed tonight's special presentation by IBM. Thank you for joining us.